The wind screamed through the Montana valleys like a demon straight out of hell, whipping snow into a white fury that buried the world in ice and isolation. I clutched little Tommy to my chest, his tiny cries slicing through the storm's roar, each wail a dagger twisting in my gut. The milk had run dry 2 days ago, our last cow frozen solid in the barn. Her udders cracked and useless, and now my boy, barely 6 months old, thrashed in hunger, his face red and feverish against my flannel shirt. Or Sarah's face flashed before me, pale and peaceful in that final moment after birthing him, her life slipping away in a pool of blood on our cabin floor. 6 months gone, and I was still raw, a hollow man fighting to keep this scrap of her alive in a land that devoured thee, weak without mercy. I paced the dim room, the fire sputtering low in the hearth, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the log walls. The Bitterroot Mountains loomed outside, invisible in the blizzard, but ever present. Their jagged peaks a reminder of how small a man could feel. Supplies were gone. The trail to Frost Hollow was a death trap, buried under drifts taller than a horse. I'd prayed hell, begged the Almighty for a sign, anything to spare Tommy from starving in my arms. But prayers felt like whispers lost in the gale. My hands trembled as I rocked him, whispering nonsense words Sarah used to sing, her voice a melody I'd never hear again. "Hush now, little one," I murmured, my throat tight. "Pa's got you." But I didn't. Not really. The emptiness in my chest echoed as hunger, a void where love had once burned bright. Filled with fear and failure, that's when the knock came, 3 sharp raps against the door, cutting through the wind like a challenge. I froze, Tommy's cries hitching in his throat. Who in God's name would brave this storm? Rustlers. Drifters half mad from the cold. I set Tommy in his cradle, grabbing the Winchester from above the mantel. Its cold steel, a familiar weight. Heart pounding, I cracked the door, snow blasting in like buckshot. There she stood, cloaked in white, a lantern swinging from her gloved hand, illuminating a face fierce and unflinching amid the chaos. "Isabella Grant," she said, her voice steady as a mountain stream, though her cheeks were flushed from the wind. The neighbor from the homestead 2 miles west, widowed young folks said, after some fever took her husband last spring. Seen her at a distance, riding her sorrel mare across the ridges, her auburn hair tied back like she was born to this wild country. Up close. Lord, she was a force. Eyes the color of sage after rain, full of a fire that could thaw the frost in. A man's soul. Heard the babe's cries on the wind. Figured you might need help. I stared, rifle still gripped tight, the warmth from inside spilling out into the night. Tommy let out another wail, and her gaze softened, dropping to the cradle. "He's hungry," she stated, not a question. Snow clung to her lashes, melting into droplets that traced her skin. Something stirred in my gratitude, sure, but deeper, a pull I hadn't felt since Sarah's hand in mine on our wedding day. I stepped aside, the door groaning open. "Come in, then, before we both freeze." She stomped the snow from her boots, hanging, her cloak by the fire, revealing a simple wool dress that hugged her frame in ways that made my pulse quicken despite the cold. Tommy's cries grew frantic, and without a word she crossed to the cradle, lifting him with a gentleness that belied her calloused hands. "She, little darlin'," she cooed, rocking him as if he were her own. Her own. Whispers from town floated back. Isabella had lost a babe not long after her husband, a stillborn that broke her, or so the gossips at the general store claimed. Mrs. Ellis, the pious widow who ran the sewing circle, clucked about it often, calling her that poor soul with a heart too wild for her own good. But here in my cabin, she was no poor soul, settled into the rocker by the fire, unbuttoning her bodice with a practicality that shocked me still. "He needs milk," she said simply, guiding Tommy to her breast. The room fell quiet, save for the storm outside and the soft suckling sounds. I turned away, cheeks burning, busying myself with stoking the fire. Forbidden thoughts crashed in. Her skin glowing in the firelight, the curve of her neck, the way she held my son like a lifeline. Sarah's memory loomed, a gentle ghost accusing me of betrayal. I'd vowed never to let another woman close. Love was a thief, stealing pieces you couldn't get back. Yet here was Isabella, bridging our worlds with an act so intimate it cracked the ice around my heart. As Tommy fed contentment washing over his tiny face, Isabella looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "Lost my little one 3 months back," she murmured, voice laced with old pain. "Body still thinks it's got a purpose. Figured it might as well help yours." Her words hung heavy, mirroring my grief like a reflection in still water. I nodded, sinking into the chair across from her, the rifle forgotten on the table. Sarah went, bringing him into the world. Left me alone to figure the rest. The admission slipped out, raw and unbidden, stirring emotions I'd buried deep. We sat in that fragile silence, the blizzard raging on, but inside. A warmth spread, not just from the fire, but from her presence. She hummed a tune, low and soothing. One I'd heard Sarah sing to calm the horses during storms. Curiosity gnawed at me. What drove a woman like her, young and fierce, to knock on a stranger's door in hell's own weather? Rumors swirled in Frost Hollow. Sheriff Harlan, grizzled and fair-minded, had mentioned her kin back east, some trouble. That sent her west. But seeing her now, cradling Tommy, her auburn curls escaping her braid, I wondered at the strength it took to offer such vulnerability. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes' time blurred in the glow of the lantern. Tommy drifted off, sated and peaceful, his breaths even for the first time in days. Isabella eased him back into the cradle, buttoning up with quiet efficiency. "He'll sleep now," she said, standing. But the storm howled fiercer, snow piling. "Against the windows like barricades? Can't send you out in that," I grunted, rising. "Bunk, here's yours for the night." She hesitated, eyes searching mine. A flicker of something unspoken passing between us, trust, perhaps, or the spark of connection in a lonely land. As she settled on the cot, wrapped in a quilt Sarah had pieced, I lay on the floor by the fire, staring at the rafters. Memories flooded, Sarah's laughter echoing in this very room, her hand on my chest during long winter nights. Whispering dreams of a family ranch thriving against the odds. Now, with Isabella's soft asterisk, the widowed cowboys. The child had no milk to eat until the neighbor girl knocked with a full breast asterisk, breaths joining Tommy's. Guilt warred with longing. She was no replacement god. No, but her kindness had pierced the armor I'd forged from grief. What shadows chased her here? And why did her presence feel like the first thaw after endless freeze? Dawn crept in, gray and muted, the storm easing. 2 flurries. I rose early, boiling coffee over the embers, the scent filling the cabin like a promise. Isabella stirred, stretching with a grace that caught my breath. "Obliged to you?" I said gruffly, handing her a mug. Our fingers brushed, sending a jolt straight to my core warm. Electric, forbidden. She smiled, faint but genuine, sipping. As Tommy cooed awake, "Neighbors look out for each other out here. Ain't that the way?" But as she bundled up to leave, hoofbeats thudded outside Sheriff Harlan. His mustache frosted, reining in his bay gelding. Whitaker heard the storm hit hard. "Everything, Holden?" His eyes narrowed on Isabella, surprise flickering before. He tipped his hat. "Mornin', Miss Grant. Didn't expect to find you here." The implication hung, subtle but sharp. Echoing the town's prying ways, Mrs. Ellis would have a field day at church come Sunday. Spinning tales of scandal and a widow's bold visit, Isabella met his gaze squarely. Babe needed feedin'. I had what? He didn't. Harlan nodded slowly, respect glinting in his weathered eyes. "Fair enough. Roads are clearing. I'll escort you home if you like." She declined with a polite wave, mounting her mare she'd stabled in my barn overnight. As she rode off, snow crunching under hooves, I watched from the porch, Tommy in my arms. Harlan lingered, clapping my shoulder. "Careful there, Caleb. Town's got eyes, and tongues wagging faster than a coyote's tail. She's a good woman, but folks like Ellis see sin in every shadow." His words lingered as he spurred away, stirring the push and pull in my chest. Gratitude swelled, mingled with a yearning I couldn't name her touch on Tommy. her voice in the night, awakening parts of me I'd thought dead. But Sarah's grave lay under the snow, a silent sentinel warning against letting go. What if this was just pity, or worse, a fleeting mercy in a cruel world? Curiosity burned. Isabella's story, her losses, the fire in her that called to mine. Frost Hollow would whisper judge, but damn if her knock hadn't cracked open a door I'd nailed shut. Days blurred into a tentative routine, the snow melting to reveal muddy trails. Isabella returned, not every day, but often enough to weave into our lives, bringing fresh bread from her oven, helping mend the fence the storm had toppled. Her laughter, rare but bright, filled the cabin like sunlight-piercing clouds. One afternoon, as we worked side by side, her sleeve brushing mine, she paused, wiping sweat from her brow. Back east, my kin thought a woman alone was weak. Proved wrong human here. Her eyes held mine, vulnerability peeking through her strength. I wanted to ask more, to share the ache of Sarah's last breath. But words stuck like burrs. That night, alone with Tommy asleep, I sat by the window, staring at the stars pricking the vast sky. The pull was undeniable, Isabella's tenderness stirring. Embers of love I'd sworn off. But the push came fierce. Memories of Sarah's smile, the town's gossip that could brand us outcasts. Sheriff Harlan's warning echoed, and whispers from the general store replayed Mrs. Ellis hissing about improper unions to anyone who'd listen. Yet in the quiet, hope flickered, fragile as a new flame. What if this was the miracle I'd prayed for? Not just milk for my son, but nourishment for a heart starved too long. Spring teased the valleys, green shoots pushing through the thaw, mirroring the shift in me. Isabella's visits became anticipated, her presence a balm. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the bitter roots, painting the sky in fire, she arrived with a basket of herbs. For Tommy's colic, she explained, brewing a tea that soothed him swift. We sat on the porch, the air sweet with pine, sharing stories haltingly her. Abusive uncles grip back in Boston, forcing her west. My dreams, with Sarah shattered by fate. Her hand rested near mine on the rail, inches apart, space charged like thunder building. I leaned closer, heart thundering, drawn by her scent of lavender and earth. You didn't have to do this, I whispered. She turned, eyes locking, breath mingling. Sometimes saving someone else saves you too. The moment hung, electric, before Tommy's cry broke it. But the seed was planted, curiosity blooming into longing. What lay ahead? Danger lurked, trustlers eyeing my land, town prejudices sharpening like knives. Yet with Isabella, I glimpsed rebirth, a love fierce enough to defy the untamed West. As weeks unfolded, tension simmered. Whispers in Frost Hollow grew Mrs. Ellis cornering me at the store, her voice dripping venom. Ain't right. A man and woman like that, no vow spoken. Sheriff Harlan pulled me aside one day, his face grave. Watch your back, Caleb. Some folks ain't keen on outsiders like her staring things. But Isabella's resilience shone, her quiet defiance pulling me deeper. One moonlit night, we rode the ridges together, Tommy bundled safe with a neighbor. Stars wheeled overhead as I confessed my fears, failing as a father, drowning in grief. She reined in close, her hand on my arm. You're stronger than you know, Caleb. We've both lost, but maybe together. ... Her words trailed, hearts teetering. I pulled away then, Sarah's ghost, whispering doubts, harsh words escaping. This ain't right, staring up what should stay buried. Hurt flashed in her eyes, but she returned the next day, unyielding, fueling my wonder at her spirit. Danger struck, like lightning a savage ambush in the canyon. Rustlers led by her vengeful cousin Vance, bullets whizzing as I dodged, my Colt roaring in the night. Sweat-slicked I charged, dropping one with a gut shot, crimson sprang. Wounded, I staggered home, Isabella bandaging me, tears mixing with blood shattering my walls. The plot unraveled Vance's scheme for her inheritance, tying town elites. Push-pull peaked in a storm, my love confessed amid barriers of guilt and scorn. At the Harvest Festival, her dance with Tommy drew stares. my heart aching from shadows. Climax roared as Vance torched the barn, flames devouring. The duel in Frost Hollow Street, pistols blazing, Vance's shot grazing, mine felling him in blood-soaked finality. Aftermath brought embrace, confessions, a kiss defying all. Rebuilding, we forged a haven, neighbors aiding, love inspiring the West's resilient souls. On a crisp autumn dawn. Closing parenthesis. Wait. The request is for Chapter 1 only. 2,000 words. I need to stop at a cliffhanger or set up for ch1. Word count. Aim for 2,000. My draft is around 1,800. Span descriptions, inner thoughts. The blizzard howled through the Montana valleys like a vengeful spirit, clawing at the cabin's walls with icy fingers that seeped through every crack. I clutched little Tommy to my chest, his cries piercing the night sharper than any wolf's call, each wail a fresh wound in my already battered soul. The milk had run out yesterday, our last jug frozen solid in the lean-to, the cow too weak from. The cold to give Moran now, my boy, barely 6 months into this harsh world, thrashed against me. His tiny fists pounding my shirt like accusations. Sarah's face haunted me in that moment, her eyes closing for the last time after bringing him into the light. Her body giving out in a rush of blood and pain that no doctor could stop. 6 months gone, and I was still drowning in it, the ranch. Near the Bitterroot Mountains, a frozen tomb where her memory lingered in every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. I paced the dim room, the fire sputtering low in the hearth, casting flickering ghosts on the log walls that seemed to mock my helplessness. The mountains outside were invisible in the whiteout, but I felt their weight, pressing down like the grief that never lifted. Supplies were dwindled to nothing. The trail to Frost Hollow was buried under drifts that could swallow a man whole. I'd prayed on my knees by the bed Sarah and I had shared, begging for a miracle. Anything to keep Tommy's cries from turning silent. But prayers felt futile in this God-forsaken land, where winter took without mercy. My hand shook as I rocked him, whispering fragments of the lullabies Sarah had sung, her voice a warm melody now lost to the wind. "Hush, little one," I murmured, my voice cracking. "PA's here. PA won't let you down." But the lie burned in my throat. I was failing him, just as I'd failed her. The emptiness in my chest, a vast prairie of doubt and despair. That's when the knock echoed 3 firm raps against the door, cutting through the gale like a lifeline or a threat. I froze, Tommy's sobs hitching. Who the hell would venture out in this? Drifters? Outlaws seeking shelter? I set Tommy in his cradle, grabbing the Winchester from the peg by the door, its barrel cold as death, heart slamming like a hammer on anvil. I eased the door open a crack, snow blasting in like shotgun pellets. There she stood, cloaked in white, a lantern glowing in her gloved hand, illuminating a face defiant against the storm. "Isabella Grant," she said, her voice steady and low, carrying over the wind like it belonged to the wild itself. The widow from the neighboring homestead, it's miles west through the ridges folks in town whispered about her, a young thinghood. Lost her husband to a fever last spring, riding alone with a determination that set tongues wagging. I'd glimpsed her from afar, her auburn hair whipping like a flag as she tended her land. But up close, she was a revelation. Eyes the shade of fresh sage, full of a quiet fire that could melt the frost from a man's bones, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but unbowed. Heard the babe's cries carried on the wind. "Thought you might need a hand," I stared, rifle still gripped. The warmth from the cabin spilling out into the night, like an invitation I hadn't meant to give. Tommy let out a fresh wail, and her gaze dropped to the cradle, softening just a touch. "He's starving," she said matter-of-fact. Snow melting on her lashes into droplets that traced her skin like tears she wouldn't shed. Something twisted in my gratitude, sharp and unexpected, but beneath it a deeper pull, the kind I'd sworn off since Sarah's grave. Beauty like hers wasn't just skin deep. It was in the set of her jaw, the way she stood tall against the blizzard's fury. I stepped aside, the door groaning wide. "Come on in, then, before the cold claims us all." She stamped the snow from her boots, hanging her cloak by the fire, revealing a wool dress worn but fitted, hugging curves that made my pulse stutter despite the chill. Tommy's cries grew desperate, and without hesitation, she crossed to the cradle, scooping him up with hands calloused from rains and plows, yet gentle as a summer breeze. "There now, darlin'," she cooed, rocking him as if he'd always been hers. Her own loss hung unspoken town gossip from Mrs. Ellis. The pious widow who ruled the church sewing circle with an iron tongue had it that Isabella's babe came stillborn, not long after her husband's passing, leaving her alone with a body that betrayed her grief. Sheriff Harlan, grizzled and straight shooting, had mentioned it once at the general store, his mustache twitching, that Grant gal's got grit, but life's been unkind. Folks ought to leave her be. But in my cabin she was no object of pity. Settled into the rocker by the hearth, unfastening her bodice with a practicality that left me rooted cheeks aflame. "He needs nourishment," she said simply, guiding Tommy to her breast. The room hushed, save for the storm's roar and the soft, rhythmic suckling. I turned away, busying myself with poking the fire, sparks flying like the forbidden thoughts in my head, her skin aglow in the firelight. The curve of her shoulder, the way she held my son with such tender command. Sarah's memory surged, her gentle touch on my arm during our quiet evenings, whispering dreams of a family that fate had snatched away. Love was a thief, I'd learned, stealing joy and leaving scars. Yet Isabella's act pierced me, stirring embers I'd thought cold forever, warmth that spread unbidden and terrifying.